The gunshot echoed across Riverside, Wyoming like thunder, but Molly Daniels barely registered it as she focused on reorganizing the shelves of her father's general store. It was 1876, and at 22 years old, she had accepted that her life would likely be confined to this dusty frontier town, a place that had grown steadily since the railroad's arrival 3 years prior. The bell above the door jangled as someone entered, but Molly continued her work, assuming her father would attend to the customer. "Miss, I need bandages. Quick." The voice was deep and urgent. Molly turned to find a tall man with blood-soaked sleeves standing at the counter. His hat, pushed back on sandy brown hair, revealed eyes the color of a summer sky, now darkened with concern. "Mr. Bishop," she acknowledged, recognizing Luke Bishop, one of the local ranchers. They'd had few interactions since his arrival in Riverside 2 years ago. He kept to himself, running his small spread outside town with just a couple of hired hands. "Are you hurt?" "Not me. One of my men. Stampede. He's at Doc Miller's, but the doc needs supplies." Molly moved quickly, gathering bandages, alcohol, and other medicinals. "This should help. Tell Doc I can send more if needed." Luke nodded grimly. "Much obliged." He placed coins on the counter and turned to leave. "Mr. Bishop," Molly called after him, "I hope your man pulls through." He paused at the door, the weariness evident in his posture. "So do I, Miss Daniels. So do I." For days afterward, Molly found herself thinking about the rancher. She'd seen hardship and worry on many faces in Riverside, but something about his quiet intensity had stayed with her. When her father mentioned that Luke Bishop's ranch hand had survived his injuries, she felt unexplained relief. Spring brought heavy rains to Riverside, turning the main street into a muddy mess and raising the nearby river to worrying levels. Molly's father had left for Cheyenne 3 days earlier to arrange new shipments, leaving her to manage the store alone. On the third morning of constant downpour, Molly awoke to the sound of shouting in the street. Throwing a shawl over her nightdress, she peered out the window of their living quarters above the store. Several men on horseback were calling out warnings. "The dam's breached. Water's coming. Everyone to high ground." Molly dressed hurriedly, her heart pounding. She needed to secure the store's valuables before evacuating. Rushing downstairs, she began moving merchandise to higher shelves and gathering the cash box and important ledgers. The roar reached her before the water did a sound unlike anything she'd ever heard. Molly froze for a moment, clutching the store's documents to her chest. A massive crack followed, and the building shuddered violently. She ran for the door just as the front window shattered under the pressure of debris carried by the surging water. The force knocked her backward, and before she could regain her footing, a terrible splintering sound filled the air. Looking up, Molly saw the ceiling beam directly above her crack and give way. She tried to move, but it was too late. The heavy timber crashed down, pinning her legs to the floor. Pain exploded through her lower body as water began seeping into the store. Molly screamed, but the roar of the flood drowned out her cries. Cold water rose around her, soon reaching her waist as she lay trapped beneath the beam. "Help!" she called repeatedly, her voice growing hoarse. The rising water threatened to submerge her completely if help didn't arrive soon. Molly fought against unconsciousness as the pain in her legs became unbearable. Through the broken window, she saw figures moving through the floodwaters, helping those stranded. "Here! I'm in here!" she cried out, summoning all her remaining strength. A shadow appeared at the shattered window, and then Luke Bishop was wading through the knee-deep water toward her, his expression changing from determination to horror when he saw her trapped beneath the beam. "Miss Daniels!" He splashed forward, immediately assessing the situation. "Don't move. The water's rising," she gasped. Luke nodded grimly. "I know. He positioned himself beside the beam, bracing his shoulder beneath it. When I lift, try to pull yourself free if you can. With a grunt of effort, he heaved against the massive weight. The beam shifted slightly, but Molly remained trapped, unable to move her legs. Can't feel them, she admitted, panic rising in her throat. Luke released the beam carefully, ensuring it didn't shift to crush her further. His eyes scanned the store until he spotted what he needed: a solid length of shelf board. He retrieved it quickly and wedged it beneath the beam as a lever. "Hold on," he instructed, his voice steady despite the urgency of their situation. The water had risen to her chest now. "I'm going to try again." Using the makeshift lever, he applied his weight. The beam lifted just enough. Without waiting, Luke plunged his arms into the water and carefully pulled Molly free, trying not to jostle her injured legs. She cried out as he lifted her, the pain momentarily overwhelming her. Luke cradled her against his chest, his expression grim as he took in her pale face. "My legs," she whispered, terrified by the numbness below her waist. Luke's jaw tightened as he waded toward the door, protecting her from the still rushing water. "You'll walk again, I swear it." The conviction in his voice gave Molly something to hold onto as darkness finally claimed her consciousness. When Molly awoke, she was in an unfamiliar bed in a sparsely furnished room. Sunlight filtered through a window, and nearby, a woman was crushing herbs in a mortar. "Where am I?" Molly asked, her voice cracking with dryness. The woman turned, revealing a kind face framed by gray-streaked dark hair. "Bishop Ranch. I'm Mrs. Flores, the housekeeper. You've been sleeping for nearly 2 days, poor dear." Memory returned in painful flashes: the flood, the crushing beam, Luke Bishop pulling her free. Molly tried to move her legs and felt a dull ache rather than the sharp pain she expected. More alarmingly, she could barely feel her attempt to wiggle her toes. "My legs." Mrs. Flores moved to her side, offering a cup of water. "Doc Miller set the brakes. Said you were lucky the beam could have cut you in half." "Brakes," Molly repeated, trying to process this information. "Both legs broken and your back badly bruised. The doctor said we shouldn't move you to town yet. Half of Riverside is underwater anyway." Mrs. Flores helped her sip the water. Mr. Bishop has been beside himself with worry. As if summoned by his name, a knock came at the door, and Luke entered. His face showed relief when he saw Molly awake. "Miss Daniels, good to see you back with us." He approached the bed, standing awkwardly at its foot. "You saved my life," Molly said simply. Luke shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." Molly attempted to sit up but winced at the movement. "Easy now, Mrs. Flores cautioned, adjusting pillows behind her back. "How bad is it in town?" Molly asked. Luke's expression turned somber. "Bad. The dam couldn't hold against all the rain. Several buildings washed away completely. Your father's store is still standing, but the lower floor is ruined." Molly closed her eyes briefly, thinking of all their inventory lost. "My father, we've sent word to Cheyenne," Luke assured her. "He should be on his way back." "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly overwhelmed by everything. A more pressing concern surfaced. "Doc Miller, what did he say about my legs?" She couldn't finish the question. Luke moved closer, his eyes meeting hers directly. "The doc says the breaks will heal, but..." He hesitated. "He's not sure if I'll walk again," Molly finished for him, reading the truth in his expression. "He said it's too early to tell. There might be damage to your back as well." Luke's voice grew stronger. "But I meant what I said. Miss Daniels, you will walk again." "How can you be so certain?" she asked, tears threatening to spill. "Because I've seen stronger recover from worse," he answered simply. "And you strike me as the stubborn type." Despite everything, Molly found herself smiling weakly. "You hardly know me, Mr. Bishop. Then I'll have plenty of time to learn while you're recovering here." His return smile transformed his usually serious face, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Over the next several days, Molly learned the extent of the disaster that had struck Riverside. 5 people had died in the flood, dozens were injured, and many businesses and homes were destroyed. Her father had returned, staying in town to salvage what he could from their store and living quarters, but visiting daily. Luke had insisted she remain at his ranch to recover, as the town was in disarray and lacked proper accommodations for someone in her condition. Dr. Miller visited twice, examining her legs with careful hands. "The bones are aligning well," he told her, "but I'm concerned about the lack of feeling in your feet." "What can be done?" Molly asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The doctor exchanged glances with Luke, who had taken to being present during these examinations. "Time will tell. In my experience, injuries like yours can heal in unexpected ways. The swelling around your spine needs to reduce before we'll know the full extent." After he left, Molly stared silently out the window, struggling against despair. Luke cleared his throat. "Doc Miller is good, but he doesn't know everything." Molly turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "During the war, I saw men the doctors gave up on walk again." He sat in the chair beside her bed. "There was this lieutenant took a bullet to his spine. Everyone said he'd never leave his bed. 6 months later, he was riding a horse." "How?" Molly asked, desperately wanting to believe. "Exercise. Determination. Refusing to accept what others told him." Luke leaned forward. "If you're willing to try, I know someone who might help." Hope flickered within Molly for the first time since the accident. "Who?" "An old Cheyenne medicine man who lives near my property. White Bear is his name. He has knowledge of herbs and healing methods that most doctors dismiss." Luke hesitated. "It might not be what you're used to." "I don't care," Molly interrupted. "If there's any chance, I want to try." Luke nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "I'll speak to him tomorrow." True to his word, Luke returned the following evening with news that White Bear would come in 2 days' time. In the meantime, Mrs. Flores helped Molly maintain her strength, feeding her nourishing broths and teas, and assisting her with moving her upper body to prevent stiffness. White Bear arrived as promised, an elderly man with deeply lined features and piercing dark eyes. He spoke little English, with Luke translating his Cheyenne words. He examined Molly thoroughly, his gnarled hands gentle but firm as they pressed along her spine and legs. After nearly an hour, he spoke at length to Luke, who listened intently. "What did he say?" Molly asked anxiously when they finished. Luke's expression was carefully neutral. "He says your spirit is strong, but your body's paths are blocked. The medicine men of his tribe have treatments for such injuries." "Will they work?" Molly pressed. "He believes so, with time and effort." Luke turned back to White Bear, who was removing items from a leather pouch. "He wants to begin today if you're willing." "Yes," Molly answered immediately. The treatments began that afternoon. A regimen of herbal poultices applied to her back, exercises where White Bear and later Luke would move her legs in specific patterns, and bitter-tasting teas that White Bear insisted would reduce the swelling around her spine. Days turned into weeks. Molly's father visited regularly, reporting on the rebuilding efforts in town and sitting with her for hours, reading aloud from her favorite books. Though he expressed skepticism about White Bear's methods, he didn't interfere, acknowledging that Dr. Miller had offered little hope for a full recovery. Luke proved to be an attentive host, often sitting with Molly in the evenings, sharing stories of his travels before settling in Wyoming. She learned he had fought for the Union during the war, then drifted westward, working cattle drives until he saved enough to purchase his small ranch. "Why Riverside?" she asked one evening as he helped her complete the exercises White Bear had prescribed. Luke's hands gently guided her right leg through a bending motion. "Seemed as good a place as any. The land was affordable, and I liked the look of the mountains." He carefully lowered her leg and began with the left. "What about your family? You were born here?" Molly shook her head. "St. Louis originally. My father moved us here after my mother died, when I was 12. He had a brother who'd written about opportunities in the territories." "Do you miss city life?" Luke asked, his hands warm against her skin as he rotated her ankle. "Sometimes," Molly admitted. "I miss the libraries most of all. And the music." She sighed. "But Riverside has become home." Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Home is where you make it." A month after the flood, Molly experienced the first definitive sign of improvement, a tingling sensation in her right foot that made her cry out in surprise. Luke rushed into the room, alarm on his face. "What's wrong?" "I felt something," Molly exclaimed, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "My foot, I felt it." The smile that broke across Luke's face was radiant. He moved to the bed, gently taking her right foot in his hands. "Here. Yes. I can feel your touch." Luke's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. He squeezed her foot gently. "What did I tell you?" "You're going to walk again, Molly Daniels." It was the first time he had used her given name, and Molly found she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. Progress came slowly but steadily after that first breakthrough. Sensation returned to her left foot a week later, and gradually moved up her legs. The pain was often intense as nerves reawakened, but Molly welcomed it as a sign of healing. White Bear visited regularly, adjusting her treatments as she improved. With Luke's help, she began more demanding exercises, including attempts to sit upright without support and eventually to stand, Luke's strong arms keeping her from falling. The first time she managed to put weight on her legs, even for just a few seconds with Luke supporting most of her weight, Molly felt a triumph greater than any she'd known before. The look of pride on Luke's face mirrored her own feelings. As summer approached, bringing warm breezes through the open windows, Molly found herself thinking less about her recovery and more about the man who had made it possible. Luke Bishop had become more than her rescuer. He was her confidant, her encourager, and increasingly, something more that she hesitated to name. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking, how his hands were always gentle yet strong when helping her with exercises, and how he seemed to find reasons to be near her whenever possible. Mrs. Flores noticed too, smiling knowingly when she caught Luke bringing wildflowers for Molly's room or reading to her long after he should have been tending to ranch business. That man never showed interest in any woman since he came to these parts, the housekeeper commented one afternoon as she helped Molly wash her hair. "Now he can barely keep his eyes off you." Molly blushed. "He feels responsible for me, that's all." Mrs. Flores snorted. "Responsibility doesn't make a man's eyes shine like that, child. Nor does it make a woman blush at the mere mention of his name." Molly couldn't argue with that observation. Her feelings for Luke had grown from gratitude into something much deeper, something that both thrilled and frightened her. What future could there be for them when she still couldn't walk without assistance? Would he eventually tire of caring for an invalid? Her father had begun hinting that she should return to town now that the rebuilding was well underway. He had secured temporary quarters above the newly repaired general store, and while they were small, he assured her they would be comfortable. The thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Luke, filled Molly with dread, but she knew she couldn't impose on his hospitality forever. The question came to a head one evening in early June as Luke helped her practice walking with the aid of crutches that he had crafted specifically for her. "Your father mentioned taking you back to town next week," Luke said, his voice carefully neutral as he stood close behind her, ready to catch her if she faltered. Molly concentrated on her steps, using the statement as an excuse to avoid looking at him. "Yes, the store reopens on Monday. He'll need help with the new inventory." "I see." Luke's hands hovered near her waist as she made her way across the room. "And you feel ready for that?" Molly reached the window and paused to catch her breath. "Ready or not, I can't stay here indefinitely, Mr. Bishop." "Luke," he corrected, as he had many times before. "After all this time, I think we're well past formalities, Molly." She turned carefully to face him, steadying herself on the crutches. "Luke," she acknowledged, meeting his gaze, "you've done more than anyone could ask already. I can't continue to be a burden on you and your household." A flash of something hurt crossed his features. "Is that what you think you are? A burden?" "What else would I be?" Molly asked softly. Luke took a step closer. "You really don't know, do you?" His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. Molly's heart began to race. "Know what?" His hands came up to cradle her face, his touch so gentle it made her want to cry. "That these past months, watching you fight to recover, seeing your courage and determination, they've been the most meaningful of my life." Molly could scarcely breathe. "Luke, I don't want you to leave," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not unless it's truly what you want. This house has never felt like a home until you were in it." Tears welled in Molly's eyes. "I don't want to leave either," she admitted. "But I'm still not whole. I may never be fully recovered." Luke's thumbs brushed away the tears that escaped down her cheeks. "Do you think I care about that? Molly, you're the strongest person I've ever known. Whether you walk unassisted or use crutches for the rest of your life, it doesn't change how I feel about you." "And how do you feel?" she whispered, needing to hear the words. "I love you," he said simply, the truth of it shining in his eyes. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I pulled you from that floodwater, and every day since has only made me more certain." Joy unlike anything Molly had ever experienced bloomed in her chest. "I love you too," she confessed. "But I'm afraid. What if I can never be the wife a rancher needs? Someone who can work alongside you, bear children." Luke's smile was tender. "The only thing I need is you, exactly as you are. As for children, we'll face that challenge if and when it comes." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I just want the chance to build a life with you, Molly Daniels. Will you give me that?" In answer, Molly released one of her crutches to touch his face, and Luke closed the remaining distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that held all the promise of the future they might share. When they finally parted, Molly realized she had been standing supported only by one crutch and Luke's steadying hand at her waist, another small victory that seemed fitting for the moment. "I should speak to your father," Luke said, his eyes still on hers. "Yes," Molly agreed, "but not about my leaving." His smile was brighter than the June sunshine streaming through the window. Walter Daniels was surprised but not entirely shocked when Luke asked for his blessing to marry Molly. He had observed the growing attachment between them during his visits to the ranch. "You're certain this is what you want?" he asked his daughter privately after Luke had made his intentions clear. "Your recovery is still ongoing. Marriage is challenging enough without such complications." Molly, seated in the parlor of the ranch house, looked out the window to where Luke was showing her father's wagon driver where to water his horses. "I've never been more certain of anything," she answered. "He doesn't see my injury as a burden, and neither do I anymore." Her father studied her face. "You've changed. There's a strength in you now that I never noticed before. It was always there, Molly replied. It just needed circumstances to bring it out. She took her father's hand. I love him, Father, and I believe we can build a good life together. Walter nodded slowly. Then you have my blessing, though I'll miss having you at the store. Molly smiled. I won't be far away, and once I'm stronger, I can still help with the bookkeeping. They were married in late July, a small ceremony in the ranch house with White Bear in attendance alongside Molly's father, Mrs. Flores, and a few friends from town. Molly wore a dress of pale blue silk that Luke had ordered specially from Cheyenne, and she managed to stand for the entire ceremony with only the support of a walking stick that White Bear had carved for her as a wedding gift. The first months of marriage brought new challenges and joys. Molly continued her exercises faithfully, making slow but steady progress. By autumn, she could walk short distances without any support, though she still relied on the walking stick for longer periods on her feet. Luke never showed anything but pride in her accomplishments, celebrating each milestone as if it were a miracle, which, in many ways, it was. He adapted the ranch house to make it easier for her to manage, building ramps instead of steps at the entrances and rearranging furniture to create clear pathways. They settled into a partnership that transcended her physical limitations. Molly took over the ranch accounts, discovering she had a talent for business that complemented Luke's practical knowledge of ranching. Together, they expanded operations, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and increasing their herd. Their physical relationship developed with the same patience and care that had characterized Luke's support of her recovery. He was unfailingly gentle, always attentive to her comfort, and Molly discovered that while some sensation in her lower body remained diminished, she was fully capable of both giving and receiving pleasure. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside their bedroom window, Molly shared news that she had been confirming with cautious hope for several weeks. "Luke," she said, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, her head resting on his chest. "Dr. Miller visited town today." Luke's hand, which had been stroking her hair, paused. "Is everything all right? You didn't mention you were seeing him." Molly propped herself up on one elbow to see his face in the dim light of the dying fire. "I've been feeling different lately. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." Concern creased Luke's brow. "Different how? Are you in pain?" "No," Molly smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I'm with child." Luke's expression transformed from worry to wonder in an instant. "Truly?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Molly nodded, her own eyes filling with tears of joy. "The doctor confirms it. We're to become parents in early summer." Luke pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "I never thought." He began, then stopped, overcome. "I know," Molly murmured against his neck. "I wasn't sure it would be possible either with my injuries. But it seems life has more surprises in store for us." "Are you afraid?" he asked, drawing back to search her face. "A little," she admitted. "Dr. Miller says my healed bones should not complicate the birth. But..." She hesitated. "He wants me to be prepared that the delivery might be difficult." Luke's jaw tightened momentarily before he relaxed it with visible effort. "We've overcome difficult before," he said with quiet certainty. "We'll face this together, just like everything else." The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Molly found her mobility more limited as her body changed. Luke was attentive to her every need, often forsaking ranch work to ensure she rested properly, until she finally insisted he hire additional help so he wouldn't neglect the business they were building together. Spring came, turning the Wyoming landscape green again. On a warm day in May, Molly sat on the porch that Luke had built for her, a wide, covered area where she could enjoy fresh air without navigating the ranch yard. She was embroidering a small gown for the baby when she felt the first pains begin. By nightfall, she was in the throes of labor, with Mrs. Flores and the midwife from town attending her while Luke paced anxiously outside the bedroom. The labor was long and taxing, testing Molly's endurance beyond anything she had experienced during her recovery. Just before dawn, when her strength was nearly spent, Molly delivered a healthy daughter with a powerful set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. When Luke was finally allowed into the room, the midwife placed the swaddled infant in his trembling hands. "You have a beautiful daughter, Mr. Bishop," the woman announced, smiling at his awestruck expression. Luke could barely tear his gaze from the tiny face to look at Molly, exhausted but radiant in the bed. "She's perfect," he whispered, moving to sit beside his wife. "Just like her mother." Molly reached out to touch her daughter's cheek. "We should name her Faith," she said softly, "because that's what brought us here, faith in each other, in the future." "Faith Elizabeth Bishop," Luke agreed, his voice reverent. "For the two strongest women I've ever known." His late mother's name paired perfectly with the one they'd chosen. As the sun rose over the ranch, bathing their room in golden light, Molly watched Luke cradle their daughter with the same gentle strength he had shown her through her darkest days. The journey from that terrible day beneath the broken beam to this moment of perfect joy seemed both impossibly long and remarkably short. "I kept my promise," Luke said suddenly, looking up from their daughter's face to meet Molly's eyes. "Which one?" Molly asked, though she knew. "That you would walk again." His smile held pride and love in equal measure. "You did that, Molly. Your strength did that." "We did it together," she corrected him, reaching for his hand. "Everything good in my life, we've built together." Faith grew into a strong, curious child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. By her second birthday, Molly had regained almost all of her mobility, though she still used the walking stick on days when her legs tired easily or when the weather caused old injuries to ache. The Bishop Ranch prospered under their joint management. Luke's knowledge of cattle and Molly's business acumen proved to be a powerful combination. They hired more hands, built a larger house, and earned a reputation throughout the territory for fair dealings and quality stock. In the spring of Faith's third year, Molly gave birth to a son they named William Walter, after both their fathers. 2 years later, another daughter, Sarah Jane, completed their family. Each pregnancy and birth was easier than the last. As Molly's body continued to strengthen and heal, the children grew up knowing the story of how their parents had found each other, how a terrible flood and a broken beam had brought together two people who might otherwise have barely crossed paths in the small town of Riverside. On the 10th anniversary of the flood, Luke and Molly hosted a gathering at their ranch for the town's residents, many of whom had rebuilt their lives just as they had. The occasion was both a commemoration of what had been lost and a celebration of what had been gained in the years since. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the large yard, Molly stood watching their guests from the porch. Luke approached, handing her a cup of punch. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Bishop," he said, following her gaze to where their children played with others from town. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out," Molly replied, "if you hadn't come into the store that day." Luke's arm slipped around her waist, a gesture so familiar now that it was like a part of her own body. "I'd have found you eventually," he said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be." Molly leaned into his embrace, thinking of all they had built together, not just the ranch and their family, but the life they shared, filled with love that had grown from the seeds of courage and faith planted in their darkest hours. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, "taking on a woman with such uncertain prospects?" Luke turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Molly Bishop, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. There isn't a single day I haven't thanked whatever fate brought me to your father's store in time to find you." Molly reached up to touch his face, tracing lines that 10 years had added around his eyes, lines of laughter and concern, of living fully through joy and challenge alike. "Then I thank that fate too," she whispered, "for giving me not just the ability to walk again, but someone to walk beside for all these years." As the fiddle struck up a lively tune in the yard, Luke offered his hand with a formal bow that made Molly laugh. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Bishop?" Setting aside her rarely used walking stick, Molly took his hand. "You may indeed, Mr. Bishop." They moved together into the circle of dancers, their steps perfectly matched after years of finding their rhythm together. Around them, the community that had rebuilt itself celebrated life and resilience, but for Molly and Luke, the real miracle was in the simple fact of their continued journey together, a journey that had begun with a promise made in floodwaters, a promise that had been kept through determination, faith, and love that grew stronger with each passing year. As the stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, Molly danced without pain or hesitation in the arms of the man who had never doubted she would walk again. The broken beam that might have defined her life had instead become merely the beginning of a story, their story that would continue to unfold with each new day, each new challenge, each new joy they faced together. And that, Molly thought as Luke twirled her beneath the stars, was the greatest healing of all.